The security camera captured it all, 2 HOA officers slamming a 12-year-old boy face-first into the concrete beside the monkey bars, his Superman backpack splitting open as notebooks scattered like fallen leaves. What they didn't know, what nobody in Willowbrook Estates knew, was that the crying child's grandmother had spent 50 years bringing down men exactly like them. And she was about to make her final stand. The swing set creaked in the October wind as Marcus Johnson pushed higher, his sneakers cutting through the amber afternoon light. At 12, he still found magic in the simple physics of momentum, the weightless moment at the peak before gravity pulled him back down. His grandmother Nana Rose had taught him that. Even when the world tries to ground you, baby, she'd said, you find your way to fly. The Willowbrook Estates playground sat like a pristine island in the center of the gated community, its recycled rubber mulch perfectly maintained, its equipment painted in cheerful primary colors that seemed to glow against the manicured backdrop of million-dollar homes. Marcus had been coming here every day after school for 3 months, ever since his mother Diane moved them in with Nana Rose after the divorce. The other kids had stopped staring at him weeks ago, the new black kid in a neighborhood that was 97% white and 100% suspicious of change. You don't belong here. The voice cut through the peaceful afternoon like broken glass. Marcus's swing slowed as he turned toward the playground entrance, where 2 men in dark polo shirts approached with the predatory confidence of sharks sensing blood in the water. The older one, barrel-chested with a gray buzz cut, had a badge clipped to his belt that caught the sunlight. His partner was younger, leaner, with the kind of pale complexion that suggested too many hours indoors nursing grievances. Excuse me, Marcus said, his voice smaller than he intended. This is a private community, the older man said, his hand resting casually on what looked like a taser. Residents and their guests only. You got permission to be here, son. The word son dripped with false paternal authority that made Marcus's skin crawl. He'd heard that tone before, from teachers who assumed he didn't do his homework, from store clerks who followed him down aisles, from his father's lawyer who spoke about him like he was evidence in a custody case rather than a person. I live here, Marcus said, standing up from the swing. My grandma's house is right there. He pointed toward the Tudor-style home with the rose garden, where Nana Rose could be seen through the kitchen window, probably preparing her famous sweet potato pie. Sure you do, the younger officer sneered. And I'm Barack Obama. Officer Rodriguez, that's what his nameplate read, stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the coffee on his breath and see the network of red veins in his eyes. Listen, kid, we've had reports of vandalism, trespassing. Someone matching your description. What description? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Young. Male. Black. In Willowbrook Estates, that was description enough. Don't get smart with us, Rodriguez snapped. His partner, Officer Chen, according to his badge, circled around to Marcus's left like they were herding livestock. We are going to need to see some ID. Proof you belong here. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. I'm 12. I don't have ID. Then we are going to need to call your parents. Get them down here to vouch for you. Chen pulled out his phone with theatrical slowness. What's your mom's number, kid? She's at work. But my grandma, your grandma, who conveniently lives right there. Rodriguez gestured dismissively toward the house. Funny, Mrs. Patterson, who called us, said she's never seen you before in her life. Said you've been coming around every day, casing the place. Mrs. Patterson. Marcus knew her, the woman with the yapping Pomeranian who walked past the playground every afternoon, her lips pursed in permanent disapproval. She'd never spoken to him, never asked his name, never bothered to learn that he lived 3 houses down from her. She just saw a problem that needed solving. I can prove I live here, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. My backpack has my school ID, my homework with my address. Don't reach for anything, Chen barked, his hand moving to his belt. Keep your hands where we can see them. The afternoon sun felt suddenly cold against Marcus's skin. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not in his neighborhood, not when he was just trying to swing on a playground like any other kid. But the Officers were moving closer now, their shadows falling across him like storm clouds, and Marcus understood with crystalline clarity that his childhood was about to end. "Please," he whispered. "Just let me call my grandma." "She can explain enough," Rodriguez said, reaching for Marcus's arm. "You're coming with us until we can sort this out." Marcus jerked backward, his instinct screaming at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. The playground was surrounded by an 8-foot fence, and the only exit was blocked by the 2 officers who looked at him like he was already guilty of crimes he couldn't imagine. "Don't touch me," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "I didn't do anything wrong." "That's what they all say," Chen laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You want to do this the easy way or the hard way, kid?" From her kitchen window, Nana Rose watched the scene unfold with growing alarm. At 73, her eyes weren't what they used to be, but she could see clear enough to know her grandson was in trouble. She set down her mixing bowl and moved toward the front door, her arthritis forgotten in the sudden spike of adrenaline. Rose Williams had seen this before. Different decade, different players, but the same ugly script. She'd been 13 when they dragged her brother Tommy away from a whites-only water fountain in Montgomery. She'd been 21 when police dogs turned on her at the Pettus Bridge. She'd been 35 when they arrested her for teaching black children to read in a Mississippi church basement. She'd spent 50 years learning that justice wasn't a river that flowed naturally toward righteousness, it was a dam that had to be broken, piece by piece, until the truth flooded everything in its path. Back at the playground, Marcus made a fatal mistake. He tried to step around Rodriguez to get to his backpack, to prove his identity, to make this nightmare stop. The officer interpreted the movement as aggression, as resistance, as confirmation of every bias that had brought him to this moment. "He's running," Rodriguez shouted, though Marcus's feet hadn't moved. What happened next would be replayed on security cameras, dissected in courtrooms, and burned into the collective memory of a community that thought it was immune to the ugliness of the world beyond its gates. Chen grabbed Marcus by the shoulders while Rodriguez swept his legs, sending the boy crashing face-first into the unforgiving concrete beside the monkey bars. Marcus's Superman backpack burst open on impact, sending notebooks and pencils scattering across the playground like evidence of a childhood interrupted. Blood bloomed from his nose and lip, stark red against the pale concrete. "Stop resisting," Rodriguez panted, pressing his knee into Marcus's back while the boy sobbed and gasped for air that wouldn't come. I can't, please," but they weren't listening. They never had been. From across the playground, a voice cut through the chaos like a blade heated white-hot in the forge of righteous fury. "Get your hands off my grandson." Nana Rose stood at the entrance to the playground, her small frame somehow commanding the entire space. She wore a simple blue dress and an old cardigan, but she carried herself like a queen surveying her kingdom. Her voice, though soft, held the kind of authority that came from staring down segregationists and senators, from facing fire hoses and federal judges, from never, not once, backing down from a fight that mattered. The officers looked up, and in that moment, the dynamic shifted. Rodriguez felt the first flutter of uncertainty in his chest, though he couldn't say why. There was something about the old woman's bearing, the way she held her head, the steel in her dark eyes that spoke of battles fought and won long before he was born. Please step back," Chen said, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is official HOA business." Nana Rose smiled then, her expression that held no warmth whatsoever. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out her phone, holding it up so they could see she was recording. "Official business," she repeated, her voice carrying the weight of 5 decades in the civil rights movement. "That's interesting. Because what I see is 2 grown men assaulting a child for the crime of existing while black in their neighborhood." The officers froze. In the span of 10 seconds, everything had changed. Marcus was no longer just a suspicious kid, he was a grandson. The playground was no longer just a crime scene, it was a battlefield. And Nana Rose was no longer just a concerned citizen, she was something far more dangerous. She was a woman who had spent her entire life preparing for this exact moment. "You boys have no idea what you've just done," she said quietly, her finger still pressing record. "But you're about to find out." The wind picked up, sending Marcus's scattered homework tumbling across the playground like the pages of a story that was about to be rewritten. And somewhere in the distance, the first siren began to wail. The sirens grew louder, but Nana Rose never took her eyes off the two officers who still had her grandson pinned to the concrete. Her phone remained steady in her weathered hands, the red recording light blinking like a heartbeat. Marcus's sobs had quieted to shuddering breaths, his Superman t-shirt torn at the shoulder, blood from his split lip staining the playground's pristine surface. Turn off that phone, Rodriguez ordered, finally releasing his knee from Marcus's back but keeping his hand on the boy's shoulder. This is a security matter. Security, Rose repeated, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had once filled churches and courtrooms across the South. Is that what you call terrorizing children these days? Chen stepped forward, his chest puffed with false bravado. Lady, you don't understand the situation here. We had reports, I understand perfectly. Rose's interruption was soft but absolute. I understand that you saw a black child playing and decided he was a threat. I understand that you escalated to violence within minutes. And I understand that you have no idea who you're dealing with. Marcus pushed himself up to his knees, wiping blood from his nose with the back of his hand. Nana Rose, I tried to tell them, hush, baby, she said, never looking away from the officers. You did nothing wrong. Nothing at all. A Willowbrook Estate's security car pulled up to the playground entrance, followed by an EMT vehicle and, to the officers' visible discomfort, a news van from Channel 7. Rose smiled at that last arrival. She'd made certain calls while watching from her kitchen window to certain people who understood the value of witnesses and documentation. This is getting out of hand, Rodriguez muttered to his partner, but Rose caught every word. Out of hand, she said, pocketing her phone now that professional cameras were arriving. Son, you haven't seen out of hand yet. Detective Sarah Martinez emerged from the security car, her expression grim as she surveyed the scene. Rose recognized her immediately. She testified at Martinez's promotion hearing 2 years ago, when the detective had been fighting discrimination within her own department. Some battles, Rose knew, were won by standing together. Mrs. Williams, Martinez said, her tone respectful but concerned. What happened here? What happened, Rose said, helping Marcus to his feet with gentle hands, is that these two men decided my grandson looked suspicious while swinging on a playground in his own neighborhood. And when he tried to prove he belonged here, they slammed him to the ground like he was a violent criminal instead of a 12-year-old boy. Rodriguez stepped forward, his confidence returning with backup present. Detective. We received multiple complaints about suspicious activity. A young man matching this description has been matching what description, exactly? Rose's voice cut through his explanation like a scalpel. The news crew was setting up now, and she knew they were recording every word. Tall. Short. Thin. Heavy. Or just black. The playground fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft whir of camera equipment. Marcus leaned against his grandmother's side, drawing strength from her presence even as his body shook with delayed shock. Chen tried again, we were just doing our job, your job. Rose laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you about jobs. Young man. It was once someone's job to count black people as 3/5 of a person. It was someone's job to enforce separate water fountains. It was someone's job to turn dogs loose on children walking to school. She paused, letting that sink in. Just because something's your job doesn't make it right. Detective Martinez knelt beside Marcus, her voice gentle. Are you hurt, son? Do you need medical attention? My nose hurts, Marcus whispered. And my back where he gestured toward Rodriguez, unable to finish the sentence. The EMT, a young black woman named Keisha, approached with her kit. As she began examining Marcus's injuries, she spoke quietly to Rose. Mrs. Williams. My grandmother knew you. Told me stories about Montgomery, about the marches. She said you were fearless. I wasn't fearless, Rose replied, watching Rodriguez and Chen whisper urgently to each other. I was terrified. But sometimes being afraid is exactly when you have to act. The news reporter, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, approached with her microphone ready. Mrs. Williams, I'm Rebecca Chen from Channel 7. Can you tell us what you witnessed here today? Rose looked directly into the camera, her back straight, her voice clear. What I witnessed was the same thing I've been witnessing for 73 years. The same thing my grandmother witnessed when she was born into slavery, and the same thing her grandmother witnessed before that. The assumption that black bodies are inherently dangerous. That black children are threats to be neutralized rather than treasures to be protected. She gestured toward Marcus, who was having his blood pressure checked by the EMT. This is my grandson. He's in the gifted program at school. He volunteers at the animal shelter. He still believes in superheroes and justice and the idea that good people will do the right thing when it matters. Her voice hardened. These men tried to beat that belief out of him on a playground. They tried to teach him that his presence is a crime and his existence is a threat. Rodriguez stepped into the camera's frame, his face flushed with anger. Now hold on just a minute. We had reasonable suspicion of what? Rose turned on him like lightning, and for a moment, the decades fell away. She was 21 again, facing down Bull Connor's police dogs. She was 35. Again, being dragged from a lunch counter for the crime of wanting coffee. She was 50 again, testifying before Congress about voting rights. Reasonable suspicion of playing while black. Of existing while black. Of being a child while black. The crowd was growing now. Neighbors drawn by the sirens and cameras, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Mrs. Patterson stood at the edge of the gathering, her Pomeranian yapping anxiously, her expression unreadable. Detective Martinez pulled Rodriguez and Chen aside, her voice low but carrying. Did either of you run his information? Check if he actually lives here before you escalated. The silence that followed was answer enough. Jesus Christ, Martinez muttered. Do you realize what you've done? But Rose wasn't finished. She approached Mrs. Patterson, her voice loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. Mrs. Patterson, you called these officers on my grandson, didn't you? The older white woman clutched her purse tighter, her face pale. There have been incidents. Break-ins. I was just being careful. Careful, Rose repeated. Tell me. Mrs. Patterson, in the 3 months my grandson has lived here, has he spoken to you? Threatened you? Done anything other than play on a playground like children have done for generations? Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Or did you see a black child in your white neighborhood and decide he was automatically guilty of something? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn. Around them, neighbors shifted uncomfortably, recognizing themselves in Mrs. Patterson's silence. The EMT finished her examination, speaking to Detective Martinez in professional tones. Possible concussion from the impact. Definitely needs x-rays for his ribs. Bruising consistent with being forcibly restrained. She paused, looking at the officers with undisguised disgust. On a 12-year-old. Marcus tugged at his grandmother's sleeve. Nana Rose, can we go home now? She knelt beside him, her arthritic knees protesting, but her hands steady as she cupped his face. In a minute, baby. First, I need these people to understand something. She stood, addressing the crowd that had gathered, the cameras that were rolling, the officers who had started this chain of events. My name is Rose Williams. Some of you might know that name from the history books you skimmed in school. I was there when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. I walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis. I sat in jail cells from Montgomery to Memphis because I still believe, that this country could be better than its worst impulses. Her voice grew stronger, carrying across the playground like a prayer and a battle cry combined. I've spent 50 years fighting institutional racism in courtrooms and Congress halls, in schools and businesses, in the hope that my grandson would inherit a world where his character mattered more than his color. She gestured toward the officers, toward Mrs. Patterson, toward the uncomfortable faces of the Willowbrook Estates residents. What happened here today tells me that fight is far from over. But it also tells me something else. Rose walked to where Marcus's scattered homework lay across the playground, picking up a math worksheet with his name clearly written at the top, along with his address, the same address that had been in the HOA directory for 3 months. She held it up to the cameras. It tells me that you were so committed to seeing my grandson as a threat that you never bothered to see him as a person. You escalated to violence rather than spending 30 seconds to verify whether a child belonged in his own neighborhood. She dropped the worksheet, letting it flutter back to the ground. That's not just racism, ladies and gentlemen. That's willful ignorance. That's choosing hatred over truth because hatred is easier. Detective Martinez stepped forward. Mrs. Williams, I'll need statements from everyone involved. Officers Rodriguez and Chen, you're both suspended PE. The call lasted exactly 97 seconds. Rose spoke in the crisp, economical language of someone who had orchestrated campaigns from church basements and hotel rooms, someone who knew that revolution often began with the right person answering the right phone at the right moment. Confirmed, she said, ending the call. Willowbrook Estates Playground. 2 HOA officers, Rodriguez and Chen. 12-year-old victim. Full documentation. She paused, looking directly at the officers who were pretending not to listen. Yes, that Rose Williams. Activate the protocol. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop without understanding why. What protocol? Who was that? Rose smiled at him with the patience of a teacher explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly slow student. That was the future calling, son. And it doesn't look good for you. Detective Martinez was taking statements when the second wave of vehicles arrived. Not security cars this time, but sleek sedans with government plates and a van marked FBI Civil Rights Division. Rose wasn't surprised she'd help write the federal guidelines that made civil rights violations against minors a priority response. Agent Patricia Williams, no relation, despite the shared surname, emerged from the lead sedan with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been pulled from a higher priority case for something that had suddenly become the highest priority. She spotted Rose immediately and approached with the respectful nod of one professional to another. Mrs. Williams, Agent Williams said. I got the call 20 minutes ago. Federal hate crime investigation is officially open. The playground had transformed into something between a crime scene and a political rally. More neighbors had gathered, their expressions ranging from concerned to defensive to openly hostile. The news van had been joined by 2 others, and Rose could see satellite trucks setting up in the distance. Marcus sat on the EMT gurney, an ice pack pressed to his face, watching the chaos swirl around him with the bewildered expression of a child who'd been playing on swings and somehow triggered an earthquake. His mother Diane had arrived 10 minutes ago, having broken several traffic laws to get there from her job across town. Mama, Diane whispered to Rose, what's happening? The EMT said federal agents, what's happening, Rose said, watching Rodriguez argue frantically with his supervisor who'd just arrived, is that these fools assaulted your son on camera. And thought they'd get away with it because it was just another black boy in a white neighborhood. She gestured toward the growing crowd of officials. They didn't count on that black boy having a grandmother who helped write the civil rights laws they just violated. Agent Williams approached the officers with a grim efficiency that made their previous confidence evaporate like morning dew. Officers Rodriguez and Chen. Agent Patricia Williams, FBI Civil Rights Division. You're both under federal investigation for violation of civil rights under color of law, excessive force against a minor, and conspiracy to deprive constitutional rights. Chen's face went pale. Federal. Look, this was just a neighborhood dispute. A neighborhood dispute. Agent Williams pulled out her tablet, showing them freeze frames from the security footage that the HOA had been required to turn over within minutes of her arrival. This shows you physically restraining a child without provocation, using force against a minor who posed no threat, and failing to conduct even basic verification of his residency status before escalating to violence. She swiped to another image. This shows the child's homework with his name and address clearly visible on the ground, homework you could have examined at any point to verify his story instead of assuming he was lying. Rodriguez tried one last desperate gambit. We had reports of suspicious activity, from whom? Agent Williams asked. Mrs. Patterson, who admits she never spoke to the child but called him suspicious based solely on his presence. That's not reasonable suspicion, Officer Rodriguez. That's racial profiling, and it's been illegal in this country for decades. The weight of their situation was finally sinking in. Federal civil rights charges carried serious penalties, and their careers in law enforcement were effectively over. But Rose wasn't finished with them yet. Agent Williams, Rose said, approaching with the measured pace of someone who knew exactly how powerful she was in this moment, I think there's something else you should know about our officers here. She pulled out her phone again, but this time she was accessing a database that most people didn't know existed, a civil rights violation tracking system maintained by activists and legal organizations across the country. Officer Rodriguez has 3 previous complaints for excessive force, all involving people of color. Officer Chen was transferred from his last position after multiple bias incidents. She looked up from her phone. This isn't their first time. It's just their first time getting caught by someone who knew what to do about it. The crowd of neighbors had grown increasingly uncomfortable as the federal investigation unfolded. Around them, these weren't abstract civil rights violations happening in other communities to other people. This was their neighborhood, their HOA officers, their ugly reality being dissected under the harsh light of national attention. Mrs. Patterson tried to slip away from the crowd, but Rose's voice stopped her cold. Mrs. Patterson, don't you think you should stay? After all, your phone call started all of this. The woman turned, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. I was protecting our community. We've had break-ins. Show me, Rose challenged. Show me the police reports about these break-ins. Show me evidence of any crime in this neighborhood involving someone who looks like my grandson. Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. You can't, Rose continued, because there aren't any. What there are, Mrs. Patterson, are assumptions. Biases. The same fear and hatred that has been used to justify violence against black children for generations. Rebecca Chen from Channel 7 stepped forward with her microphone. Mrs. Patterson, do you regret making the call that led to this incident? I was just being cautious. Cautious about what? Rose interrupted. A child swinging on a playground. A boy carrying a Superman backpack and homework. What exactly about my grandson did you find threatening, Mrs. Patterson? The silence stretched out like a held breath. Around them, other neighbors shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own assumptions and biases reflected in Mrs. Patterson's stammering inability to answer. Finally, Mrs. Patterson found her voice. He didn't belong here. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock and recognition through the crowd. In 5 words, she had crystallized everything wrong with Willowbrook Estates, everything wrong with gated communities that used safety and property values as code words for racial exclusion. Didn't belong here, Rose repeated slowly, savoring each word like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Mrs. Patterson, my grandson lives here. His name is on the HOA directory. His mother pays association dues. His homework has this address written in his own handwriting. She stepped closer, her voice carrying the weight of every civil rights battle she'd ever fought. So when you say he doesn't belong here, what you really mean is that black children don't belong in your white neighborhood. What you mean is that you'd rather call armed men to terrorize a child than question your own prejudices. Mrs. Patterson's face crumpled. That's not. I'm not racist. I have black friends, do you? Rose asked quietly. Name one. Right now, in front of all these cameras, name one black friend you have. The silence was deafening. Agent Williams cleared her throat. Mrs. Williams, we're going to need a full statement from Marcus. Is he up for that? Rose looked at her grandson, still sitting on the gurney with his ice pack and torn Superman shirt. Despite everything, despite the blood and the trauma and the federal investigation swirling around him, Marcus looked up at her with trust in his eyes. Trust that she would make this right, trust that justice still existed in the world, trust that his grandmother could fix anything. Marcus, she said gently, these people need to hear your story. Do you think you can tell them what happened? Marcus nodded, setting down his ice pack. When he spoke, his voice was small but clear, carrying across the playground with the simple honesty that cut through all the adult complications and legal maneuvering. I was just swinging, he said. I like to swing high because Nana Rose says it's like flying. And these men came and said I didn't belong here, but I do belong here. This is my neighborhood too. He looked at Rodriguez and Chen, who were being fitted with handcuffs by Agent Williams's partner. They hurt me because they thought I was bad. But I'm not bad. I'm just a kid who likes to swing. The simplicity of it, the pure, undeniable truth of a child's perspective, hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Here was the victim of their bias and fear, not a criminal or a threat or a statistic, but a 12-year-old boy who just wanted to swing high enough to feel like he was flying. Rose felt tears on her cheeks for the first time since the ordeal began. Not tears of sadness or defeat, but tears of pride. Because Marcus had done something remarkable in that moment, he had refused to let hatred make him hateful, refused to let violence make him violent, refused to let their attempt to break him actually break him. That's right, baby, she whispered, pulling him into a CA. 3 days later, Willowbrook Estates looked like a war zone fought with cameras and protest signs instead of bullets and bombs. The manicured lawns that had once represented suburban perfection now hosted satellite trucks from CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. The pristine sidewalks where residents once power walked in peace were crowded with protesters carrying signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and "Playgrounds not prisons." Rose sat in her living room, fielding calls from reporters and civil rights organizations while Marcus recovered upstairs. The boy's physical injuries were healing, no concussion, just bruised ribs and a split lip that would leave no permanent scar. But Rose knew the deeper wounds would take longer to mend. Her phone buzzed with another incoming call. This one made her smile. "Congressman Lewis," she said, settling back in her favorite chair. "I was wondering when you'd call." The voice on the other end carried the weight of decades shared in the struggle for justice. John Lewis, now in his 80s but still fighting, had been with her on that bridge in Selma all those years ago. "Rose, I saw the footage. That could have been any of us at 12 years old." His voice was heavy with familiar pain. "How's the boy?" "Strong. Stronger than those fools who thought they could break him." Rose looked toward the ceiling, where she could hear Marcus playing video games, the sound of childhood reasserting itself despite everything. "But John, this isn't just about Marcus anymore." "Oh no. The footage has gone viral. 15 million views and counting. The president called this morning, she wants to address it in tonight's speech." Rose felt a flutter of satisfaction. President Harris had been one of the prosecutors she'd mentored decades ago, back when Kamala was just starting her career in civil rights law. The networks Rose had built, the seeds she'd planted, were bearing fruit in ways she'd never imagined. "Good," Rose said. "But we need more than speeches. This community, this whole system of exclusion and assumption, it needs to be torn down and rebuilt." Outside her window, she could see Mrs. Patterson's house. The woman hadn't left her property since the FBI arrested the officers. Her husband had lost his job at a tech company after the viral video identified him as complicit in the culture of racism. Their neighbors, once friendly, now crossed the street to avoid them. That was the thing about consequences, Rose reflected. They had a way of spreading far beyond their original targets. Her daughter Diane appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of mail that had been piling up since the incident. "Mama, you need to see these." Rose took the letters, recognizing immediately what they were, the kind of hate mail she'd been receiving for 50 years. Poorly spelled threats, racist slurs, promises of violence from cowards who signed their hatred, a concerned citizen, or didn't sign it at all. But mixed in with the poison were other letters. Beautiful, handwritten notes from children across the country who'd seen the news coverage. Pictures drawn in crayon showing Marcus on the swings with angel wings. A letter from a class of third graders in Detroit asking if they could send him new superhero backpacks to replace the one that was torn. "The hate mail's predictable," Diane said, settling onto the couch. "But some of the support letters." She pulled out a particular envelope. "This one's from the family of that boy in Minneapolis. The one who was killed by police last year. They said watching Marcus survive gave them hope." Rose felt the weight of that hope, the terrible responsibility of representing something larger than herself or her grandson. She'd carried that weight for decades, but it never got easier. Her phone rang again. This time it was Agent Williams. "Mrs. Williams, I have updates on the case. Rodriguez and Chen have been formally charged with federal civil rights violations. If convicted, they are looking at 10 to 15 years. What about the HOA?" Rose asked. "They hired these men, trained them, sent them to terrorize children. That's where things get interesting. Our investigation found a pattern of discriminatory enforcement going back years. The HOA has been systematically targeting people of color while ignoring identical behavior from white residents. We have emails, internal memos, training materials that are essentially blueprints for racial profiling." Rose smiled grimly. She'd suspected as much, but having federal confirmation was sweet vindication. "We are recommending a complete federal oversight of the HOA's operations," Agent Williams continued. "New leadership, mandatory bias training, civil rights monitors. Essentially, we are putting them under the same kind of supervision we use for police departments with pattern and practice violations." "Good," Rose said. "But I want more than oversight. I want transformation." That afternoon, Rose walked through the neighborhood she'd called home for only 3 months but which had already changed her life forever. The media attention had drawn curious onlookers from across the city, but it had also revealed the true character of her neighbors. Some houses displayed small signs of support, Black Lives Matter flags, children's drawings taped to windows, homemade signs reading "Marcus is welcome here." But others had gone into fortress mode, pulling curtains tight and avoiding eye contact with anyone who looked like they might ask uncomfortable questions. She found Marcus at the playground, sitting on the same swing where his innocence had been shattered 3 days ago. But he wasn't alone. A group of neighborhood children, most of them white, had gathered around him like a protective barrier. Word had spread through the local elementary schools, and kids with a moral clarity that their parents lacked had simply decided that Marcus belonged with them. "Nana Rose," called out Emma, a red-headed girl from down the street. "We are teaching Marcus how to do tricks on the monkey bars." Rose watched as the children played together with the unself-conscious joy that adults had forgotten was possible. Here was the future she'd been fighting for, not perfect, not without its challenges, but fundamentally decent in a way that gave her hope. "Mrs. Williams." Rose turned to find a young white woman approaching hesitantly. She recognized her as Jennifer Morrison, who lived 2 streets over with her husband and infant daughter. "I wanted to apologize," Jennifer said, her voice shaking slightly. "Not just for what happened to Marcus, but for not speaking up sooner. I've seen the way some people look at your family. I've heard the comments at HOA meetings. I should have said something." Rose studied the young woman's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with the kind of awakening that only came from being forced to confront uncomfortable truths. "What stopped you?" Rose asked, not unkindly. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Cowardice. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that if I just minded my own business, everything would be fine. But watching that video, seeing what my silence contributed to." She wiped her eyes. "My daughter's going to grow up in this neighborhood. I want her to grow up in a better neighborhood than the one I helped create through my silence." Rose felt a familiar stirring in her chest, the recognition of a potential ally, someone whose conscience had been awakened by crisis and who might be ready to do the hard work of change. "Then don't just apologize, child," Rose said gently. "Act. The HOA is going to have new leadership elections next month. Run for the board. Make sure the new policies actually get implemented. Turn your guilt into action." Jennifer nodded eagerly. "I will. I promise I will." As the young woman walked away, Rose felt her phone buzzing with yet another call. This one was from her old friend Judge Patricia Hamilton, now sitting on the federal appeals court. "Rose, I've been following the case. Magnificent work, as always." Patricia's voice carried the warmth of shared battles and mutual respect. "But I'm calling about something bigger. The Department of Justice wants to use your case as a model for a nationwide investigation into HOA discrimination. They are calling it the Civil Rights in Housing Initiative." Rose's heart raced. A nationwide initiative meant resources, attention. Federal oversight of the thousands of HOAs across the country that used community standards and property values as code words for racial exclusion. How nationwide are we talking? Rose asked. Every state. Every HOA with a history of complaints. They want to audit the entire system, root out the discrimination, and establish new federal standards for community governance. Rose, this could be the housing rights revolution we've been waiting for. Rose looked across the playground where Marcus was now hanging upside down from the monkey bars while his new friends cheered him on. 3 days ago, he'd been slammed into concrete for the crime of existing while black in a white neighborhood. Now, his trauma was becoming the catalyst for systemic change that could protect millions of other children like him. When do we start? She asked. But even as Rose began planning the next phase of the battle, she noticed something troubling at the edge of her vision. A small group of neighbors had gathered near the playground entrance, their body language tense, their voices low but angry. She recognized them, the same people who'd been notably absent from the expressions of support, the ones whose curtains had stayed closed throughout the media coverage. They were pointing toward the children, toward Marcus, toward her. And as their voices grew louder, she caught fragments of their conversation of property values. Media circus. Wouldn't have happened if they just stayed where they belonged. Rose felt a chill that had